welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast. My name is Clayton Tyner, and this is episode 1, calling it Ready, Set, Start. Thought this was the perfect place to begin the official first episode of the podcast because this is the start. I also want to talk specifically about how hard it is to start when we are stuck. If every person was to make a list, put down 3 to 5 bullet points, and really think deeply about things that you're currently not doing that you would like to do, everyone could come up with something. Even if it's just one thing, you might have the most maximally fulfilled life, and there is something that you would like to start. Some people may see this as little things, little habits or hobbies that they want to pursue. And other people may see these as huge moves, like leaving a secure job to go into the unknown and start your own business, go from just a dating relationship and take the big leap into engagement and really pursue marriage. It could be small things that you think are small, like starting a new hobby, like maybe you want to start baking or woodworking or forging knives, that could end up being a big thing that revolutionizes your life. This is really an appropriate place for me to start because I began this podcast to explore what matters. And I'm starting with a core assumption that your life matters, probably more than you can even imagine. And because your life matters, there are topics and ideas and truths that also matter in order for you to maximize your potential in life and to really begin living. And so we all spend a lot of time exploring what does not matter, binging through shows and scrolling through feeds and the like. And so it made sense to take some time and set it aside to really dive deep into these topics, as deep as we know how. And I think I'm a good guide for that because there's nothing really outstanding about me. I'm a pretty normal guy. And so I'm going to dive as deep as I can. And many of you will be able to take these ideas and dive even deeper, but it's the exercise that matters, and not just diving deep, but then emerging from the depths with some application and some ways that we can actually apply this to our life. And really, I just want to share these things that have been given to me by mentors who've put arms around my shoulders and books in my hands. It's an appropriate topic, ready, set, start, because I've wanted to do a podcast for at least 5 years. And here's the thing about whatever it is you want to start. If you're looking for an excuse not to do it, you will always find it. And you won't just find one excuse. You will find 10 excuses, 20 excuses. You'll find a new excuse for every season that you find your life in. And so at some point, we have to have a way of thinking about this. And before we know how to start, we've got to really dig deep and understand what keeps us from starting. There are a couple of books that I'm going to be referencing, and there are links in the description. One is Linchpin by Seth Godin, where he talks about the lizard brain and the resistance, as well as a book called Start by John Acuff. Both of these are great books to purchase, to buy, to read, to listen to, if you're really serious about getting started. Both of them talk about this idea that is deeply ingrained in all of us, the resistance, also known as your lizard brain. And what this tells us, and this should be comforting on some level, and it should scare the crap out of us on another level, is that the surface level reasons that we think keep us from pursuing our dreams, starting something significant, showing up to work and bringing our whole self in there, going for that promotion, pursuing that relationship, it's more than the surface level. Because on one hand, maybe you're convinced you're lazy. Like, enough people have told you that you're lazy, that you've just bought that. And it's like, that's what I struggle with. I'm just a lazy person. And maybe you are. I don't know you. The most common excuse nowadays is, I'm busy. I'm just too busy. Crazy busy. It's interesting, even like 10 years ago, when you asked someone, hey, how's it going? What did they say? They said, fine. Now, that was a lie. They're not fine, right? Like, for most people, something at all times is going wrong. It's like, if it's not your job, then it's your kids. And if it's not your kids, then it's your marriage. And if it's not your marriage, it's your social circle. And if it's not your social circle, then it's your, psychological framework. And like, something is going wrong at all times. And then we just lie because we don't want to get into it. And we just say, yeah, fine, good enough. Every once in a while, you know how weird it is when you say, hey, how's it going? And someone just starts laying it on like, actually, I'm quite depressed. We're never ready for that because it's so rare. We just say, fine. But now we don't say fine. Now it seems like 8 out of 10 people, when you say, hey, how's it going? What do they say? They say, oh my gosh, so busy. And we wear busyness like a badge of honor, as if filling every single moment of our schedule with something equals efficiency in life, and even more than that, effectiveness in life. And we just know that that's not true. The second thing about busyness is we all have more time than we think. And we can prove that by just going into the settings on our smartphones and looking at the amount of hours, and I mean hours and hours we spend a week on our different apps. And so busyness is such a convenient excuse because it's like all of society has bought the lie that we're supposed to be busy all the time, and our lives are busier. We're filling them up and filling them up. And it's like kids sports used to be a Wednesday practice and a Saturday game. And that was like the whole thing, like an hour practice and then an hour game, 2 hours of your week. None of our kids are going to the NBA. It's fine. Now it's like, if you want to make middle school sports, you better have them at 3 years old practicing 5 days a week on 2 different teams and in 3 different tournaments every weekend. I know so many parents who are taking out loans every quarter so that they can travel for their 8th grader who's going to grow up and be a dentist to play in baseball tournaments all over the country. It's just crazy. It's crazy how busy we have made ourselves. And so we have these surface level excuses, but they don't actually explain what's going on. What actually explains it is your lizard brain. So I'm a pastor, I'm not a neuroscientist, but there are several parts of your brain. And, on the very rare chance that a neurosurgeon listens to this someday, I'm just going to pre-apologize for how I butcher everything I'm about to explain. But at the most basic level, your lizard brain, which is actually called your amygdala, it sits at the very core of your brain. It's like right on top of your spinal cord. And it's called the lizard brain because it is the brain we share in common with even reptiles. Reptiles are like 100% instinct. Their entire life is about eating and not being eaten. Like that's it. So the amygdala is an expert at eating and not being eaten. It controls the most basic fundamental instincts that you have, like hunger and thirst and sexual desire for the sake of procreation. It's all of the things that you need to survive and to create so that a lineage can survive after you. And that's pretty much it. The amygdala is largely fear driven, and it is what we share in common with most of the animal world. Now, that's like our downstairs brain. That's what drives us. We're in fight or flight. That is what keeps us safe when a car comes careening towards us. And without ever thinking about it in your prefrontal cortex, you jump out of the way. That was your lizard brain saving your life. It's why we freeze when we hear a rattle that might be something else, but might be a rattlesnake. It is the most instinctive part of who we are. And your amygdala, your lizard brain, wants control. You see, a lot of things that we do with the higher functions of our neurology are things that are counterintuitive to the part of our brain that's trying to keep us alive. And this is why the lizard brain, the amygdala, is often called the resistance. Now, the resistance is an interesting term. It comes from a few places. Seth Godin uses it in Lynchpin. Pressfield uses it in The War of Art. And it is this idea of this tangible, felt, visceral moment that happens when you sit down to put pen to paper, to put a plan together, to start something new. I'm curious, like me, how many people have gotten exactly 1/100th of a way into a passion project and never gotten any further. I have designed the cover to 3 different books that I've never written. I have the ideas, I have the content, but the resistance won. It did not allow me to venture in to the unknown. The resistance is what you feel when you're going to ask that girl out or when you're going to give that guy your number. all the way up, like when you're writing the number down, and every number you're going, this is so stupid. I shouldn't be doing this. I should stop. No, don't put that next number. And then you fold it up, that's what you do when you rub a little bit of your cologne on it, right? No, no one else does that. Okay. And then it's like every step that you take, or it's even when we're filling out a text message, you can feel it. It is visceral. And maybe you thought you're the only person who, when you try to start something or venture into the unknown or do something brave and courageous, feels this, but it is all of us together. And it's not just this surface level of fear. This is at the biological, neurological level. That is your amygdala trying desperately to keep you safe. The amygdala, the lizard brain, it kind of makes us stupid, and it kind of is stupid. It's actually incapable of high function. And so when you're going to ask that person out, or to interview for that new job, or to fill out a business plan to incorporate the career you're going to start, the amygdala doesn't really have the capability of differentiating between an emotional death and a physical death. Because when you ask that person out and they say, no, thanks. In some sense, that is an emotional death. It is vulnerability. It is putting yourself out there in a way that is dangerous. It's dangerous to the chemicals that float through our body that determine our moods. It's dangerous to our psyche and our confidence. It's dangerous to keeping us in a place where we believe in ourselves. All of these things that matter. And like in the animal world, you lose your confidence. Alpha male is going to come along and eat you for dinner. And so the most base part of our brain, it can't tell the difference. So anytime we're going to venture into the unknown, it is like hitting the brakes as hard as it can, anti-lock brakes. And if we don't figure out how to get the lizard brain's foot off of the brake, then we're going to keep trying to press the gas, and we're just going to be spinning our wheels. And so there is this interesting thing that has happened when we look back at written history, and in the scope of however old the world is, and there's debate over that, whether it's millions or billions. There's young earthers who think it's thousands, and I certainly am not educated enough to get into that debate. But written history doesn't really go back that far. And yet there is this phenomenon about the dragon and the walled fortress. And what we see is that on every inhabited continent, which were obviously unconnected, there was no internet, no one was calling each other, no one was writing books and Amazon packaging them across the seas. In all of these disconnected, unrelated continents, and all these different tribal groups, and all these different villages, and all these different nationalities who were like different in almost every way imaginable. They had different belief systems, they had different cultures, they thought about the world differently. But in virtually all of them, they have a myth of a dragon. And of course, the dragons kind of look different in different places, but it's the same archetypal story time after time after time. The dragon and the walled fortress. It shows up all over history. And of course, we're still making stories about the dragon and the walled fortress today. And I believe that as an archetype, it exists because it expresses something at the deepest level about human experience. And so to understand it, we have to understand what a dragon is. And a dragon is a very odd creature. It's not really one thing. It's like an amalgamation of many different animals. And so all at once, a dragon is sort of like a tree-dwelling feline predator, right? So a panther or a leopard, it's very much like this dangerous cat. And then it's very serpent-like. And so it's also like a snake. And snakes can dwell in the trees, and they also live on the ground. And snakes are also very dangerous, and they are predators. And it's also winged. And so it's kind of like a bird of prey, like an eagle or a hawk or something that can exist above you. And so it's like a snake that is danger from below you. And then it's like a tree-dwelling panther that is danger kind of at this mid-level. And then it's also this like winged, incredible predatory bird. And then if that's not like enough, it also has, sharp teeth. And so anything with sharp teeth, like our amygdala recognizes sharp teeth as danger. That's a real problem. And then if that's not enough, it freaking breathes fire. So it's like, okay, even if you're a good distance away from it, it's like a snake, hawk, panther, volcano, shark. It's all of the things. And so what does that mean? It means that the dragon represents the combined sum total of all of our fears. So like people weren't afraid of tanks, they weren't afraid of ballistic missiles. Those didn't exist. But everyone has had fears, and fear has been one of the driving motivational factors, if not the driving motivational factor for all of human history. And so what a dragon represents on the level of symbol or on an archetypal level is all of the combined fears all in one. And so the combination of our fears is what keeps us from pursuing our dreams. I've heard that that's like great empirical evidence, right? I have read that you're only born with two fears, and maybe there's like someone who studies babies that can tell me something different on here, but we're going to pretend this is right. You're born with two fears, and it's the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. And those are both very much ingrained into our five senses, right? And so you hear a loud noise and it does something to your ears and it triggers your amygdala, because oftentimes loud noises mean real danger. And then falling, we actually feel falling. It's like that feeling of losing your stomach. It's going down on the roller coaster, and so we have these two fears. And what that means is that all of our other fears are learned. And it's one of the reasons why, as kids, when we're in this period of innocence, and some people have a prolonged period of innocence, especially today, because they're born into safe environments, they're vaccinated, and they're like taken care of, and they're probably not going to die from the smallpox. And, the majority of kids, especially in the West, have the food that they need, and, they're entertained, and people really take care of them, and we prioritize children like we should. And so a lot of kids get like 5 or 10 years, where everything is just good. And they're slowly learning fears. They're slowly learning, like, you can't touch this, and this is hot, and this will bite you, and you can't pull the dog's tail. And they're learning those, but they haven't broken into this overarching fear of the unknown yet. As a matter of fact, they're fascinated by the unknown, and they're not scared of it. And you see it in kids, because kids really don't fear the dragon. The sum total of their fears is maybe enough to make one of the things that represents the dragon. Like maybe it's a panther, but it's not a panther, snake, hawk, volcano, shark. It's just like one of those things. And so they'll still venture out. And what you notice is kids very rarely before the age of 10 have a lot of insecurity. And that's why they'll just tell you exactly what they're going to be when they grow up. They're going to be an astronaut, or they're going to be in the NBA, or they're going to be a superhero, or whatever they're going to be, because there's nothing holding them back. And venturing out into the unknown, that's like their thing. That is what they want to do. They're curious, and they want to explore and inspect. They want to know it all and see it all and experience it all. And somewhere along the way, we learn through our learned experience and our lived experience that there are many, many things to be afraid of. And maybe we have like a parent that we can never please. And so we learn that it's a certain type of metaphorical death to not live up to expectations. And as soon as that becomes this metaphorical death in our life, our amygdala is going to process that as something to be avoided at all costs. And so it is going to flood your body with resistance anytime that you try something that you might not live up to the expectation of. And for some people, it's like you just, somewhere along the way, someone didn't love you correctly. And maybe it was a parent that left you and just disconnected from you. Or maybe it was in your teenage years or preteen years where you were let down really hard. And you weren't just let down, but you were let down and then put down, right? Like, not just I'm not going to date you, but I'm not going to date you because. And like, here's the crazy thing is these little childish things that get said to us, like, I'm not going to date you because you smell bad, or because, because your teeth, right? I had jacked up teeth, and all these things that like stick with you growing up. And maybe you had some other physical thing and you weren't super excited about it. And you weren't just broken up with. But then it was explained to you why. And now all of a sudden you have this deep, deep insecurity, and now you're unlovable. And so pursuing a relationship is putting yourself in the position to experience a metaphorical death again, and your lizard brain will not let it happen. So what do we do if there's a dragon, which is the sum total of all of these fears that have been accumulated and that we're still accumulating? We're still accumulating fears, and in every season of our life, there's new things to be afraid of. And like if you're in your 30s, you're not really probably just freaking out about not having enough retirement yet. As a matter of fact, studies would show that you're not putting any money into retirement. And by the way, you should start doing that, because if not, you're going to have a new fear when you get into your 50s and 60s. But I'm just saying, in different seasons, we have different fears, and you start getting into your 60s and 70s, and there's some health concerns that you start having that you probably don't have in your 20s right now. And so you've accumulated all these fears, and all of those fears together are the archetypal dragon in your life. And there's going to be new fears up ahead of you that you're going to have to deal with. And all of those fears add another element to this winged serpent, cat, volcano, shark that sits right outside into the unknown. That's where the dragon lives. It's right beyond what you're comfortable with. It's right beyond the parameters of where you've been hurt before. And that's the dragon in your life. And so what does everyone do? Because there's dragons, they build a walled fortress. And that's where they live. And you build a walled fortress because inside of that, you can contain everything that is known, because everything that is known is safe. And ultimately, what the dragon represents is our greatest fear. And our greatest fear is what is unknown. And so that can be legitimate. It's a good reason not to frivolously try drugs, because sometimes what is unknown can kill you. However, what is also unknown are things like your potential, your future relationships, who you could be as a parent, what contribution you could make to the world if you were in a career that fit both your skills and your passions. All of those things also exist in the unknown. And so you wall yourself in a walled fortress, and we do this with all different strategies. The walls are made out of these surface level excuses, right? Too busy, not educated enough. I don't have a degree in that. I'm lacking some experience. I'm not old enough. I'm too old. I'm not big enough. I'm not influential enough. I'm not a good enough communicator. I've never really been a self-starter, right? It's like, think of an excuse. That's what you're building your walls out of. It's built out of all of the surface level fears that you have. It's built out of the insecurities that you've accumulated throughout your life. It's built out of your addictions. We wall ourselves in with our addictions, and we're so afraid of the unknown, and we've been hurt so bad every time we've tried to just venture out a little bit that we sit in our addictions, and our addictions help us, at least momentarily, forget about all of the things that are out there that we could be pursuing. And so we get a temporary high, which is usually followed by an emotional and psychological crash where we end up lower than when we started. And pretty soon we've lost all motivation entirely to do anything but sit into our cycle of addiction. And the idea of venturing outside of our walls, where your potential and promise and your future and your destiny is at, all goes out the window. So we have a problem because we all have a dragon. And it's so interesting that when you go into these different cultures, the dragons look differently, but they're always a dragon. It's unmistakable. When you see it, you say, that's a dragon. And their dragon is smaller, and their dragon has bigger wings, and their dragon is more like a serpent. But it in some ways represents the unique dangers that were in that area of the world. So we all have a dragon. And the dragon is the guardian of the unknown. And what is unknown is chaos. And our amygdala believes, our lizard brain believes, that what is unknown equals death. So we have a significant uphill battle in order to get started. And I wonder if maybe even today, you'd be willing to take a minute and think about what comprises your dragon, because culturally, I think we all have some in common. And it takes a while, but people put new ideas and new metrics into society, and metrics are a good thing because you have to measure what matters. But when metrics are misused, or when they're bad metrics, they become sources of great and unnecessary fear. And so a lot of us have a very real fear that the life that we've created in the digital world that is like picture perfect, like there's nothing wrong with it and everything's great and everything's fine. 10 years ago when someone would say, hey, how's everything going? And you say, oh, it's fine. Or maybe you're that kind of person who has to say like, oh my gosh, so good, right? Life is so good. And it's not. Well, now we've added this metric of our digital life where we're being measured. That's a metric. We're being measured by what we present in our digital life. And if anyone actually came into our walled fortress, if anyone came into how we're actually living and realized that our actual life at the deepest level does not represent what we portray online at all, that's another kind of metaphorical death. It is the death of the illusion that you've presented through this platform that now we all have. It's like, this is on YouTube and podcast channels. Why do I have a platform? That doesn't even make any sense. But we all do now. And so there's new danger. And so if your digital life becomes your realist life and it doesn't actually line up to what's inside the walled fortress, then you have to isolate, or you have to pretend, or you have to become an expert at deception. You have to wear a lot of different masks all the time. You have to juggle so many things that are incongruent with one another that at some point it will fall. And when it falls, it will be devastating. We have all of these ways to wall ourselves in. We have all of these fears, and I wonder what yours are. Because on a real level, if you don't understand what your dragon is and what it's comprised of, if you don't understand what the fears are that are keeping you from wandering into the unknown at the deepest level, then you won't understand the deaths that you're afraid of. And if you don't understand the metaphorical deaths, whether it is the death of just standing out, for some people it's joy. It's like the thing you are most afraid of in the world is really experiencing joy. Because as soon as you have joy, it's something that could be taken away from you. And you would rather just not have it in the first place. The dragon is the unknown. And the unknown comprises all of your fears that you've accumulated and that you will accumulate in the future of what might happen if you were brave enough to go out of the walled fortress. Here's a few things you need to know. Your walled fortress is always incomplete because you are always incomplete. We're always lacking. And what that means is that while we are situating ourselves to stay away from danger, danger will come to us. And how frustrating is it that we spend all this time, energy, and effort insulating ourselves from the unknown and chaotic, and the unknown and chaotic make its way to us anyway. And so we do everything we can to protect everyone that we love, and people still die. And we do everything we can to insulate our marriage from anything that might disrupt it or come against it. And then at the end, they have an affair anyway. And what is so counterintuitive is that often the very steps that our lizard brain pushes us to take to wall ourselves off from the dragon of the unknown are the very things that end up defeating us from within. In a very real sense, the walls that you put up are your prison, not your protection. And so you think that the walled fortress is protecting you. It's protecting you. Yo, there is a dragon out there. There is like a snake, shark, volcano, panther, hawk out there, like all the fears you could think of. I mean, gosh, if I started this business, if I let people know that, like you're a baker and it's like, you know what? I'm going to put a price tag. I'm going to put a price tag on this muffin. I'm going to put a price tag on this croissant. Some of you are giving away what should be a business because the fear of the unknown, as soon as you put a sign on that muffin that says $2, you have crossed into the unknown of whether or not you will be rejected. And the idea of being rejected, that is the wings of your dragon, and you cannot bear the thought. And so resistance wins. And the walls that you're putting up to keep your hobby, and all your friends say, bro, if I would buy this knife, you're making these knives, you're making these wallets, you're taking these pictures, you're building these websites. I'd pay you to do that. I guarantee that thing you want to start, someone at some point has encouraged you in it. They might have even said directly, you should do this. You're just like cutting friends' hairs for fun. You're just snipping some hairs. You're just giving them some hairdos, and you're just dyeing it up and stuff. And they're like, you should do this. Oh man, you want to kickstart the lizard brain. Have someone tell you, you should do this. You should put a price tag on it. They're asking you to move beyond the walls of your fortified city. You see it as protection. They see it as a prison. You see it as something that's keeping chaos out, when in reality, it's keeping your potential in. There is a reason that the archetype of the dragon and the walled city, the walled fortress, has existed seemingly for all of human history, all people for all time, because we've always had fear. And the greatest fear is what's right on the other side of all of the protective measures that we've put in place. Our real life, lived to the fullest, is right on the other side of our comfort zone. The unknown makes people do things that are so unbelievably illogical. And right now, Katie and I are watching The People versus O.J. Simpson. And, like, did O.J. do it, right? We'll say that for another podcast. But what we do know is that Nicole kept getting back with O.J. He had 62 convictions of abuse. 62 times he was reported, maybe not convicted, but reported for abusing her. 62. And she kept going back and kept going back. And it's not like that's uncommon. We see that all the time. Well, what is that? The dragon of the unknown is scarier than the dragon that you know, the demon that you know. And so people stay in abusive relationships because the abuse that they are under, there's a lot more to it than that. Number one, on a psychological level, it would be very unfair to make this like a multivariable statement because there is a lot going on. But one component of that is oftentimes the devil you know. This is an actual saying, but I can't remember it. But something like the devil you know is better than the devils you don't know. Or in our case, the dragon you don't know. And so you just stay in a terrible situation. And I don't know, there's going to be someone who listens to this at some point who's going to be like, oh, that sounds great. And I'm going to stay in a job I hate for 30 more years. Even when we're dating, how many people do you know that are dating that you're like, why? It's like y'all hate each other. And the reasons people will give you are the dragon and the walled fortress. And here's the walled fortress. I don't know. It's like, all my stuff's already at her house. And like, she has all my CDs, so I have to start my CD collection over. And it's like, wait. So you're going to maybe just stick in here and marry this person because you don't want to start a CD collection over. You've got a CD collection in your walled fortress, and that's enough. You see, that's the way that we make decisions is more influenced by this than almost anything else we can think of. And that's why I wanted to start here, because your life matters and your life has incredible potential, and your potential is on the other side of your walled fortress, and we all have them. And here's the reality is even when we go beyond it and when we face our dragons, the danger is we face it, we defeat it, and we build another walled fortress because there's always another dragon. And once what is unknown is known, now you have to cope with the next step of what is unknown. But that is the adventure of life. That is the adventure of conquering your fears, defeating your dragons, being the hero, reclaiming new territory, building something else, but being willing after you've built it to still venture off into the further unknown. And instead, what we want is we want convenience and we want comfort and we want all of it to work out exactly when it's supposed to. And we just want to live in our little worlds of our own fears and insecurities. And maybe there's something else out there, but I would rather just stick in what sucks that I know. And this is because the lizard brain makes us stupid. And so for 5 years, I wanted to start a podcast. But guess what? I was too busy, and I've got 3 kids at home, and we were in the adoption process, and we were starting a new church. So we were planting a whole new not just congregation, but it's, you're starting a whole new nonprofit and incorporating and getting everything set up and starting a board. And then, there's always problems. Like there's always problems in life. And that's a good thing, because if there's never problems, then we'd be so bored that we would create unnecessary problems. So necessary problems are fine. And that's how you get to progress. You get to progress through problems. And so it's just like going and working and building and buying houses and selling houses and moving. And there's just always a reason. And I have my own dragons, So I was really scared to death of this format, because I communicate every week, but I communicate to a congregation as a preacher, and I'm very comfortable there, and I can gauge what's happening and how people are feeling. And, if you say something funny, people laugh. And if you say something that you think is going to be funny, but it's not actually funny, they don't laugh. And that's a little disheartening, but it's a good thing, because through that process, you learn what is actually funny. And when you say something that is meaningful, you draw people in, you can see them shift in and give you their attention. And here it's like a webcam and my own self, on a screen looking back at me. And it's so far outside of my comfort zone. And my coping mechanism in life has always been achievement. And so it's like, if I don't know, like if I don't have an almost 100% guarantee that something's going to go well, I just won't do it. It's like, I'll just stay in my walled fortress of the two things I know how to do well. And I'm not going to add a third, because I might not be good at it. And I'm telling you, that's just like one little piece of my dragon. It's the sum total of all of my fears. So is yours. So is everyone's. And so, how do we take real steps towards getting out of that comfort zone? The archetype holds true throughout human history, across geography, across demographics. There's always a dragon, and there's always a hero. And so the question is, how do we become that hero? How do we have the courage to face our dragon? What I want to talk about is ready, set, start. And I believe that to get ready means to fight your fear. Getting ready means to fight your fear. And hopefully you understand now that isn't just courage, although that's certainly an aspect of it. And it isn't just mechanical, like I'm going to make a list and then I'm going to do step 1 and step 2 and step 3. And I'm not saying that won't work. What I'm saying is that when you get to the end of that list, the root cause of your problem is still going to be there. And so if we don't find a meaningful way to deal with this lizard brain and to fight our fear at the deepest level, then all that's going to happen is you're going to get 4/10 of the way into this project, and the resistance will win because you haven't dealt with it yet. The closer you get to starting and the closer you get to your potential, the harder and harder the lizard brain will fight to keep you alive, whether it's at a physical level or a metaphorical level. We have to fight our fear. And so part of that is integrating our downstairs brain with our upstairs brain. And I'm using that, and I actually got that out of a book that teaches you how to discipline at-risk kids, right? So we adopted our daughter when she was 5 years old. She was 4, and then 8 days later, she turned 5. And especially adopting an older kid, they are by definition an at-risk kid, and they've definitely not had the nurture of caretakers along the way to help them develop. And one of the most critical parts of developing as a child is the integration of your brain, and your neural framework can become very fragmented. And so I love the way that it teaches this. And I'll reference this book in a different podcast when we talk specifically about parenting, but it uses the hand as an illustration of the brain. And so it says, it put your thumb across your hand, and this is like your amygdala. This is your lizard brain. And in science class, you were probably taught Amygdala, like they call it a name, like her name's Amygdala. And it sits right at the base of your spine. And then this is your upstairs brain. And this is like your hypothalamus and your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is really where you're able to make really good decisions and process things at a super high level. And so, but just for the sake of it, it's like, these are all your higher functions of your brain. And these are your base animal functions of your brain. And so what you want is this integration. And you kind of have one or two options. You can be intentional about forcing your amygdala to integrate into the higher reaches of your brain, or your amygdala will jump into the driver's seat and will force your higher functions to bow to its will. And so if you give in to your lizard brain enough times, then you can actually begin to train your prefrontal cortex that it's right, that it is too dangerous to take risks, that it is too dangerous. And so we become the servant of the most low base part of who we are on a neurological level. And what they say is like when you go into fight or flight, it's like you flip your lid. And it's this great way to teach young kids, especially at-risk kids who really struggle with, explosive emotional outbursts and stuff like that, that this is something that's happening to you in your brain. Your brain is actually in control of this. And so they teach this. So when they go like this, they understand it and they can start the process of integrating through different mechanisms, different ideas, different practices and exercises, whether it's just taking some really, really deep breaths. One thing that they have these kids do, and I'm telling you, if you want to take this seriously, you can do this stuff too, is to put their hands on the wall and kind of almost like a calf stretch where you would lean into the wall and try to keep your feet flat on the ground and try to push that wall down. Push that wall as hard as you possibly can. And what this does is it begins to integrate your body, and you're making the decision to do that. And so you're reactivating that part of your brain, and you're pushing. And honestly, for an at-risk kid, what it keeps them from doing is it lets them put out a lot of force, a lot of physical force without doing something like punching or hitting or scratching, dangerous things. And these are ways to begin to reintegrate. And another way to do that is to ask yourself questions, because your amygdala can't answer questions. It's not smart enough. It requires your prefrontal cortex to begin firing. And so that's the next part. How do we do that? How do we begin to integrate these two parts of our brain? Well, number one, you have to speak truth to your false narratives. Your lizard brain can't speak truth. It's just instinct. And so what is true to it is whatever keeps you alive. It keeps you eating and it keeps you from being eaten. And that's its job. And outside of that, the rest of the brain has to operate. It's in the rest of the brain where we have dreams and strategies and ideas and argument and debate, and where we experience love and all these different things. So again, not a neurologist, just for the sake of this conversation, these higher functions of our brain, when we begin to ask questions or to speak truth, one of the most powerful questions you can ever ask is, who said that? And even saying it out loud, and if there's people around, they're going to think you're crazy, but this whole thing of this emotional outburst of a kid where they flip their lid and there's disintegration and they're in fight or flight, that is the resistance. And for you, it doesn't look like you screaming or crying or throwing a tantrum, throwing yourself on the ground, punching yourself, punching other people. Hopefully it doesn't look like that. What it looks like is the paralyzing fear that keeps you in your walled fortress. And so we have to reintegrate. We've got to keep this amygdala surrounded with the higher function of our brain. And we do that by intentionally speaking truth to false narratives. And what do I mean by a false narrative? A false narrative is created when your amygdala makes the obfuscation between real death and metaphorical death. Getting turned down for a date or broken up with, not getting chosen for the job after you put yourself out there in an interview, publishers not accepting your first draft, the business that you started failing. None of those things will actually kill you. However, your amygdala, with good intentions, because the intention is to keep you alive, your amygdala will equate these metaphorical deaths in the same way that it will move you out of the way of a car to keep you physically alive. It will move you out of the way of the opportunity of a life to keep you metaphorically alive. And so we have to speak truth to that. And we have to ask a lot of questions like, who said that? And you might be surprised by the answer, because a false narrative of you don't have the skill or experience, or you're not old enough, or you're too old, or your gender doesn't usually do this, or because of your background or where you're from, or you didn't have the upbringing for this, or your parents didn't love you enough. When you ask that question, you ask it honestly, and you're willing to explore what matters on a deep level, and these are questions that matter, you might be surprised where they came from, because they might have come from a peer in third grade, and they might have come from the family member who abused you, and they might have come from a failure early on in life that you haven't thought is a big thing, but if you're honest, you never got over, and it keeps you from really trying anything today. Speak truth to your false narratives. Say the things that you actually know about yourself. And one of the ways to speak truth to these false narratives, which again is engaging this upstairs brain, its reintegration, is to document your denial. Document your denial. Those things that are keeping you from starting, write them down. You see, this is another step. When you speak it out loud, you're engaging part of your brain. When you speak it out loud and you put pencil or pen to paper or even hands to a keyboard, it's engaging another part of this upstairs brain. It's engaging another part of what separates us from all the rest of creation, all the rest of the animal kingdom. It's engaging parts of your brain that will begin to reintegrate yourself and give you a whole brain, to give you something that can think. And you don't want to get rid of your amygdala, because you will die like really, really quickly. You'll start petting rattlesnakes and playing in traffic and things like that. You don't want to get rid of it, but you do want to be in control of it. And you don't want to put it in the driver's seat for the metaphorical deaths that you probably need to incur. This is evergreen content, hopefully. And so hopefully you can listen to this at any time, but it was just Easter. This last Sunday was Easter in 2021. And Easter is when Jesus defeated death. And by defeating death, he taught us a powerful lesson about resurrection. And for Christian believers, we believe that, Jesus actually died. He actually rose again. He actually ascended back to heaven. He's actually coming back for us. He is the key to not just the fullness of life right now, but to eternal life someday. But on an archetypal level, he taught us that there is no resurrection without death. And so maybe the career you want to start is not the right career. But there's also a good chance you will never get to the right career without going through the wrong one. And maybe the person you want to ask out is not the right person to be your spouse. But if you don't have the fear, or if you don't have the courage to start and to try to start somewhere, then you may never figure that out. A lot of people have an idea of what their spouse is going to be, and it needs to be corrected. Because a lot of times what we want our spouse to be is coming from a very unhealthy place. And all it takes is dating 2 or 3 people that have those aspects or those looks or that money or whatever it is that you think you want in a spouse, to realize that's actually not what I need. It's not what I want. It's not what's best for me. It's not what will push me and that person towards our potential. And so you have to start. And so I think you should document your denial, and you should write down your fears, and you should be ruthless about this. You should be ruthless, because your amygdala is already driving ruthless false narratives. They're already in your mind, and you might be shocked when you begin writing these down exactly what you think about you. And there is a good chance that maybe for the first time in your life, you're going to think, I should probably cut myself some slack. I'm not perfect, but I am not all of these things. Write down your fears. Okay, so we're integrating our brain. We're speaking them out loud. We're questioning them. Then we're writing them down. So we're activating different parts of our neural network, and then share them with a trusted friend. Now, all 3 of these things exist outside of our walled fortress. Speaking out these false narratives is moving us into the unknown. Writing them down is moving us even further. And then sharing them with someone else. Oh my gosh, the insecurities and fears associated with that. But it's one step closer. It's one step closer to those walls. It's one step closer to getting to the other side. It's one step closer to your dragon. And every time you get closer, the resistance is going to work overtime to keep you from doing it. But these are the steps. These are the steps to not just say, I'm not going to be lazy anymore. And I know I'm busy, but even though I'm so busy that I'm barely sleeping and barely seeing my kids and never dating my wife, I'm just going to add something else to my plate. It's like, well, that's a horrible idea. Let's go to the base, core, deepest reason. Let's address what's going on in our mind. I think if we all did this honestly in the West, probably 90+% of us would realize that we are unnecessarily busy. Because busyness is rewarded. Busyness is a badge of honor. And so we keep busy with what is frivolous to keep us from our future. We live in the walled city. If you want to make your way out, if you want to start, speak truth to your false narratives, document your denial, and share it with a friend. And your friend is going to say, number 1, I can't believe you think that about yourself. Number 2, 3 of these things are true, and so you need to be aware of them. And if they're a real friend, then they will speak truth to you. They will let you know you do need to start, but you need to start with this in mind. We want to approach the dragon, but we don't want to do it full-heartedly. We can't be afraid of failure, but we should fail necessarily, not because we aren't ready. The first way to get ready is to fight your fear. After you get ready, you have to get set. And that means to set yourself up for success. There's a few things that I would encourage you to do. Number one is take some time to understand your level of responsibility, because your level of responsibility informs your level of risk. The risk that you can take should be in direct proportion to the level of responsibility that you hold. And so if you are a 20-something non-married with no kids, your level of responsibility in life is pretty low, which means that the level of risk that you can take is pretty significantly high. If you run out of money, then all of a sudden you're like every other millennial and you're living at home for a minute and you're getting back on your feet. And let's try not to live at home forever. But I'm just saying you can fail spectacularly. And it's not like there are kids who aren't getting dinner that night. If you are married with no kids, you have a responsibility to your spouse, which means they need to be on board with this at some level. And that, when I say some level, I mean like a high level. And the only reason I say some is because we're never going to be 100% certain about anything. And perhaps you're going to realize that your spouse is in a walled fortress, and that's not where they need to be either. And so you have to very lovingly, and hopefully you've built enough equity in your marriage to bring them along and maybe share some of this content so that they can make an informed decision about what it means to fight their dragon. And once you're married, the two become one. And so you have your individual dragons, but you have dragons together that you have to fight now, which means you have a higher level of responsibility. And so you got to take that into consideration, but you can still risk at a pretty high level. And if you're married with kids, then more responsibility. If you're married with 5 kids, then even more responsibility. If you fail spectacularly, there are a lot of people depending on you. And if you own an entire business and you're married and you have 5 kids, this is why every single move of a president is so critical. Not just every move, but every single word they say is so critical, because they have the highest level of responsibility. And so it's like everything they do is a risk. And so you have to understand that. And what I have quite a bit of responsibility. I'm the senior pastor of our church, and I am married to Katie, and I have 3 kids. And so to start this podcast, the risk seems so high, and the risk of it taking over too much of my time when I'm already low on time. And I'm not low on time because I spend every bit of it working. I'm low on time because I've set boundaries around my off time to keep my work out of it, so I can continue dating my wife and I can continue being a real part of my kid's life. And I mean, I fail at all those things all the time, but it's like I have these big truths in front of me that to live my life well, I have to be a great husband and I have to be a great dad. And so I should be striving towards those ends. So in order to start it, I had to think critically about how to free up time. And I think we all have time to free up. And some of you could start what you want to start, at least at some level, just by not watching SportsCenter any longer, or just by watching like one less show on Netflix. Not don't watch Netflix, but one less show, and it's not going anywhere. It's on Netflix for a long time. So watch it later and get started. You have to understand your level of responsibility. And when I really felt God putting it on my heart to start MetaChurch, I was at an awesome church, in a very large church, and I had quite a bit of responsibility. I had quite a few people who were working directly for me that I was supervising, and I wanted them to come with me, but I had responsibility to the organization, and so I had to try my best to find a way that was, a win-win, because the last thing I wanted to do was to leave at their expense. I wanted to leave in a way that was a win for them, and I wanted to leave in a way that was a win for us, and then a win for my family. And so I couldn't even make move number 1 until Katie was on board. And then I had to understand and assess the risk and make sure that she fully understood what it means if this doesn't work out. And I had phone calls lining up backup jobs because I have 3 kids that are relying on me. That's how they eat and have shelter and all of these things. And so understand your level of responsibility. And if you have really high responsibility, it doesn't mean you can't start. It just means that you have to be serious about your risk. And it might mean that you don't quit your day job yet. It might mean that you allow your day job to fund your dream job and you start at the same time. And maybe for a season, you're doing them both concurrently. And maybe for a season, you have to delete all of your social media apps because you're spending 7 hours a week on them and you need 7 hours to begin building your dream job. And so understand your level of responsibility, which will help you understand your level of risk. This is one of the ways you set yourself up for success. The other thing you need to do is invest just enough to motivate you to follow through and not a penny more. So I'm saying that in a financial sense, but it doesn't have to mean financially. For me, 5 years in, I said I have to start. And so I had to understand the risk. And the risk is that I had too much to my plate, which doesn't allow me to be a good husband and a good dad. And so I had to make adjustments to my own life to make sure that that wouldn't take place. Besides that, it was pretty low risk. And then I had to invest enough to make me do this. And so for me, I invested right at $300. I bought a microphone that would sound good. I bought a webcam that was pretty cheap. I bought some lighting, some little dangly lights behind me. I bought all these books to pretend like I'm smart. No, I'm just kidding. I have read these books, but I bought a subscription to this broadcasting platform called StreamYard. And so I invested enough to where it's like, number one, if I don't follow through with this, I'm going to be mad at me because I'm $300 out on this thing. My wife is going to be mad at me because now I'm just like setting money on fire for no reason. And it'd be hard to live with myself to even the investment of completely rearranging in a way that makes no sense our office. I made our office basically unusable for this. And that was a sacrifice that Katie was willing to make, an investment that she made into me, and her encouragement was an investment into me. And so invest just enough to motivate you to follow through, but don't invest more than that. And what I see a lot of times, I was a musician for about a decade, and I would see bands get started, and before they had played one single gig, before they'd played one gig, before they booked a gig, before they had released one album, it's like they had 1,000 t-shirts printed, stickers, hats, they bought all of the gear you can imagine. They had a full setup. Like they were ready to go on the road, except they didn't have one freaking show to go play. And so they invested so much that now the only gigs they could take were well-paying gigs because they had to pay back all of the money they put on credit cards to set themselves up like freaking a Metallica tour, And so it's diminishing returns. It's like, you're not going to make enough money to pay back what you've already invested into this band like ever. Here's the thing. To start, you have to be willing to start for free almost always. Like you have to go in the music world, you have to go and play 100 shows for maybe pizza and maybe gas money before you have enough legitimacy for people to go, okay, what's your honorarium? What would you like to get paid? You have to build to that. And I love Chance the Rapper. One of his lines says, shortcuts cut short long runs. Yeah. Shortcuts cut short long runs. You may be very tempted by the shortcuts, but they're almost never helpful in producing what you need inside of yourself to have sustained success over the long run. So invest just enough. Like if what you need to start is getting in shape and you want to do it through running, buy just expensive enough running shoes and set them right in front of your door that if you're not going to run, it's going to kill you to walk past them, right? It's like, what a waste. Like buy them and burn the receipt. You've now invested enough to potentially motivate yourself to put them on and walk around the block. And if you walk around the block in a month, you'll run around the block. And if you can run around the block in another month, you'll run around the neighborhood. And if you can run around the neighborhood in another month, you'll run around the city. And it's like, it builds like that, but you have to start with investing just enough. And only you will know what that means. It's like, if you're going to be a baker and you're an amazing baker and everyone's like, you should sell your baked goods, invest in some price tags and a display case. Do not go buy a $5,000 industrial oven yet. Build to it. Make your way outside of the walled city. Understand that your dragon is defeatable, and then go from there. Set a time frame, and don't measure success until you have fulfilled it. And part of this is just because of the world we live in. We expect success right now. It's like, yo, I started this podcast last week and I don't understand why I don't have 1 million subscribers. That's not a hard answer. You don't have 1 million subscribers because you started last week. It's like, we are just an on-demand culture. And we want it, and we want it right now. And we don't want to wait to watch the season. We want to binge the entire 5 seasons right now. And, it's like if our food takes 20 minutes to get to the table at a restaurant, we're not tipping. I cannot even believe this. And so it's like, we want success and we want it right now, and it's not going to happen. If it does happen, good job. You are a massive exception to the rule, but it's probably not going to happen. And what this does, by setting a time frame and not measuring success until you've fulfilled it, is it forces you to focus on what you can actually control. I cannot control who listens to this. I cannot control who subscribes to this. I cannot control who comments or, shares this or tells their friends about it. I can't control any of that. And so for me, I've decided until I am 30 podcasts in, I'm not measuring it. It's not that I'm not going to look at the views. It's just that I'm not going to try to make any sense out of it. And if the subscriptions dip, I'm going to do my best to fight my lizard brain to not care. I will care right when I get past 30 episodes. And at 30 episodes, I'll look and I'll see, listen, if I went from 100 subscribers to 10, there's a chance I'm doing something wrong. And maybe I can run some experiments to see if different formats or different time links or whatever else, what works. But I'm not going to try to make sense of it, because as soon as you start trying to control the uncontrollable, you're no longer focused on fighting your dragon. You're focused on manipulating inside your walled fortress. And that is a way to live, but it's a difficult way to live. And it's not a very fulfilling way to live. And so set a time frame. And maybe it's like, I'm just going to, I'm going to keep my day job because I got mouths to feed. But I'm going to start selling this on the side for 6 months. And after 6 months, then I will stop and I'll measure it. And it doesn't mean you're going to quit. It doesn't mean that you're going to, but it's like, I'm going to set a time frame and then I'm going to look at it. And then I'm going to make a decision. And you might be shocked because after 6 months, you may be able to go part-time in your day job and then really go part-time here. And then 6 months later, you may be able to go full-time. And so if you're going to get in shape, just run. It's like every day I'm going to go around the block at least once. And 2 weeks in, you're going to go around the block twice, even though you just want to do it once. And then it's like, after I've done 100 laps around my block, then I'm going to make a decision. And then I'm going to invest in more gear. And then I'm going to take it more seriously. And so set a time frame, set a goal. And after you've reached that, then measure, then strategize, then make your next move. And so you have to remember, masterpieces, they all start as massive pieces. Oh man, I am so proud of that line. And it is so true. It's like anything that you've ever seen that just blows your mind and is amazing, or any business that you see that is really successful, or any entrepreneur that you really look up to, they started with something that sucked. And if you're not willing to suck, then you're not willing to succeed. Masterpieces all start as masterpieces. And so you're ready. You have fought your fears. You've set yourself up for success. And now it's time to start. And to start is to leave the comfort of your fortress, to face the unknown, to fight your dragon, and to be a hero. And so what I don't want you to hear is that you have to be all the way ready and all the way set, because all that becomes is another excuse to never start. You have to be reasonably ready, which means you are in the practice of fighting your fears. You're integrating your lower downstairs brain into your upstairs brain, your stupid lizard brain into your incredible, unimaginable prefrontal cortex. You're speaking out your false narratives. You're writing down your fears. You have a trusted mentor, a trusted friend who is speaking into them to make sure you are battle ready. You're setting yourself up for success. You're gauging your responsibility risk ratio. You're investing into it enough to motivate you to make sure that you're going to follow through with this thing. You're setting a time frame and only focusing on what you can actually control, and you're recognizing to get to that masterpiece, to get to your destiny, to get to your future, to get to your potential, you have to be willing to start. Your walled fortress is not protecting you. It is imprisoning you. It's time to venture beyond it. And don't forget, your greatest blessings will be your frequent failures. And you will fail. And maybe not on the first time you fight the dragon. Maybe it's the second time or the third time. At some point, the dragon might eat you. But failure can be your greatest blessing, depending on how you view it. There are two sides to it. Number one, you're an idiot, you're incompetent, worthless, loser. You should have never left your city. You should have stayed in the walled fortress, and everything your amygdala told you about you was right. Or now, knowing for sure one path that doesn't work, I'm significantly closer to finding the path that does. You can fail forward, or you can fail in place. But spoiler alert, failing in place is failing backwards, because time is always moving on. Failure is life's greatest teacher, and it's also one of our biggest fears. And so if you can give voice to failure that says, this is how I win, you're eliminating one of your greatest fears that will keep you from fighting your dragons. Ready, set, start. Your life matters. Get ready, fight your fears, set yourself up for success, and start. You are meant to be a hero. And I hope that today's episode has been helpful to someone out there. I hope that you will even consider taking on some of these challenges. Challenge number one was to just make 5 bullet points and write down things you want to start. Really thinking deeply about that. And then really considering the fears that are holding you back. I wonder if you could actually give voice to your dragon. Draw it out. What's it made of? What are your greatest fears that comprise this beast that is keeping you from your unknown potential? Get ready. Fight your fears. And when the resistance comes, and it will come every step along the way, it's not like you fight it once and you're over. You'll fight it every day, every minute, every time you put your hand to the plow to start sowing into your future. If you want a harvest to come, you have to fight the resistance. And so maybe you need to stand up and stretch. Maybe you need to try to push a wall down. But you definitely need to speak out against your false narratives, to question them, to document your denial, write it down, share it with a friend. Get a mentor who will help you see yourself accurately, not see yourself how your lizard brain has framed you in your own mind. Set yourself up for success. And then it's time to start. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Clayton Tyner podcast. I hope to see you guys next week.